Hey everybody, my name is Thom Singer.
And I'm Eliz Green, and welcome to the Webinar Talk Show. Today, we really want to focus on getting connected again. And in this crazy situation that we're in, Thom, I know you talk a lot about social tightening. Want to share just a little bit about what that means?
Yeah, I came up with this term early on in this work from home sort of orders that we all fell under because everybody was talking about how we had to social distance. And then they changed that and started calling it physical distancing. But the idea was we needed to stay apart. And this sort of scared me because I realized that all opportunities in our lives really come from people. And so we needed to make an effort to make sure that while we were going through all this disruption, that we weren't losing that human connection with friends, with family, with coworkers, with clients, with vendors, with neighbors, etc.
And one of the things that in this format that we've been talking about, the webinar talk show, one of the things that we can do is facilitate that connection amongst participants. One of my favorite things is to share some content, even if we're sharing some content by interviewing somebody, and then send people out into those breakout rooms to have discussions that are structured so people get a chance to interact with each other. Another way webinars don't have to be boring.
And that was one really fun thing that we did with that group of women lawyers is we were able
Correct.
to, have the content, have the interview, but then they spent a half hour going into the breakout rooms and just talking about what was going on in their lives, how they were dealing with disruption. So there's a lot of ways that, like I've been saying all along since we started this, webinars don't have to be boring. A webinar should be more. It should be more than a talking head and a voice over PowerPoint. And that's what we're trying to do. And I think that's what we're going to bring to everybody today.
Yes.
I think we've got a great interview set up.
I think we do too. Who's our guest today?
So today I'm really excited that we're going to be joined by Tony Chatman. Now, Tony is a professional speaker like Eliz and I are, but my relationship with Tony began 2 years ago when we both were selected to be on the same stage for a TEDx talk. And somebody said, oh my gosh, you're going to be in Kansas City doing a TEDx. So is Tony. You know Tony. And I thought, I don't know Tony. So the night before our TEDx talks, we went out to dinner. And then the next night was the event. And then following that, we went out and sort of debriefed together over drinks. And so every time I see Tony or I see his name, I always think he's my TEDx buddy. Couldn't ask for a nicer guy, couldn't ask for a smarter person. And he is an expert on corporate relationships. So this whole idea is we talk about how do we keep relationships alive? Tony knows all about that. He goes into some of the top companies in the world and really talks about how that matters. And one thing he's become an expert in is sort of this whole idea of dealing with disruption. And that's what I want to talk to him about today because we're all going through disruption. So welcome to the Webinar Talk Show, Tony Chatman.
Yay!
Yay!
There he is.
Hey, so, Thom, hey, Lee.
Hey.
How are you guys?
We're doing good. Thank you so much for joining us. I really enjoyed getting to know you a couple of years ago through that TEDx experience that we had and have been sort of stalking you ever since.
That was an absolute blast. And it was great meeting you. We've done a couple of virtual happy hours together as well. And I'm super happy to be here.
So, Tony, I think that, as we talk about disruption, that's a word that's on everybody's lips right now. Get us started a little bit. Before this crisis and to now, let's talk about disruption.
Okay. So, disruption is one of those funny things because I've worked on change for years with organizations. And about 2 years ago, disruption became this buzzword, right? Everyone, I'm a disruptor and I'm disrupting disruption through my disruptology and all this stuff. And I'm sitting here going, you guys have never actually had to deal with disruption. You basically thrown a hand grenade in a room and ran. And everybody else is like, oh my God, there's a bomb in the room. Well, now everyone's experiencing the bomb. I don't think people are going to be calling themselves disruptors anymore, okay?
No.
People have now experienced it. And so when you think of disruption, here's how I view it. When you look at change, there's a methodology, right? You plan the change, you instill a vision, you get buy-in, you do all of this stuff so that you end up with this end product. Disruption just happens. And when it happens, you're like, what the? That's really, and so now you're constantly playing catch up. And number one, plan change doesn't go well for organizations. But disruption is just a totally different animal. And so now everyone is trying to figure out, how do I get my bearings? A lot of people are disoriented. They're just trying to figure this out. And so that's really where I come in, is trying to help people get their feet on solid ground, get a sense of reality, get a little bit of stabilization, and help kind of rebuild their lives a little bit, understanding that even what we're in right now is still temporary.
One of the, I study stress. So one of the things that I know, when people have a disruption, that they feel like the rug's been pulled out from underneath them, that sends us into almost a panic state, and we tend to make poorer decisions in that mode. So how do you work with people to get out of that, oh my gosh, this happened, what are we going to do about it, to actually making better decisions about what's going on?
First, I love what you just said. So you're probably familiar with the stressor scale, right? That a lot of actuaries and insurance companies use. And maybe we can post that a little later. What's fascinating is when you look at the stressor scale, all it really is a measurement of how much change a person is going through during a given period of time, right? It starts off with death of a spouse, then divorce, and it goes down. And it has positive and negative change. But really what we're saying is, in this moment, during disruption, during this change, it is natural to feel stress. I think that's super important for people to realize, because it's easy to think, okay, why do I feel so abnormal? And why am I, some days I'm like good as gold. And then other days I wake up and I'm like, I'm pulling the covers back over my head to get this, right. Sometimes we're real snappy. And so, there's all that. So part of it for me starts with, number one, acknowledging the emotion, right? And there are some tactics you could use, like, body language and things. But I think intellectually, when you start looking at cognitive reframing, I think that's super helpful. So, number one, like, you could redefine things. It's easy to say, okay, right now, we're in a quarantine and shelter in place. That is one way to look at it. Another way to look at it is, right now, I'm safe. I'm safe, and my family around me is safe, and I'm in control of their, making sure that we do the right things to stay safe. Something as simple as that can make a world of difference. Or even if, okay, well, I'm not safe because I'm an essential worker, and now I'm going out putting myself in harm's way. Because no, what you're really doing is you're serving the community and your people in a way that they could not do themselves. And you may be saving lives by going to work. And just a simple reframing like that, put things back into perspective.
So Tony, one of the things you said when you started out was, you said that in the best of times, a planned change often sucks for companies, right?
Yeah.
I mean, when we know we have to go through a change, it doesn't necessarily go well. And that often upsets company culture. And I know that you know a lot about the culture of companies. So in the current state of disruption, what's happening to companies? Should they be worried about that corporate culture? Is disruption going to sort of explode the good and maybe a little bit of the bad of that culture that pre-existed this?
Yeah, that's fascinating. So number one, what disruption is going to do is it's going to magnify the company's weakness, right? So, if you're not doing a good job of training your leaders, it's going to show right now. If you don't have great engagement, it's going to show right now. If you're not good at planning, all of that is going to show. So really what this is it's like a litmus test to go back now and say, where do I shore up the different areas of our company? And that's where people like, the three of us come in and say, okay, now that you need us, let's come in and fix this before the next disruption, because I promise you another one's coming. There's no question about it, right? So that's the first thing. I think second thing is organizations have to realize, I've got to look at this in two time frames. Right now, and then, people are arguing 12 to 18 months from now. Okay. Those are two different time frames I have to look at. Right now, we're in triage. So I'm not measuring anything based on what's happening now. This is just, we're patching them up and sending them back out. And that's what we're trying to do. But now we're thinking, and we're really guessing. We're guessing what are things going to evolve to in the next 12 to 18 months? And that's where we start to do planning and to realize as we're looking at this, opportunity comes from here, okay? Maybe I'm an organization that's been totally against remote work, and now I've got to rethink it, okay? Maybe I'm an employee that's been totally for remote work, and I'm like, yeah, it was a great idea when I was at home by myself, but now spouse, kids, caddy. Okay, look, I'm being honest. We downsized into a 2-bedroom condo 2 years ago because sending the kids to school, right?
Right.
All the schools are shut down. So now in our 2-bedroom condo is me, and I'm in the dining room having this conversation. My wife is in the bedroom on a conference call. My 2 sons are in what was supposed to be my office, but they refer to as their bedroom. Then we have a dog and a cat. I'm like, yo, I didn't sign up for this. This is not right. So people are really rethinking everything. And it's an opportunity to say, okay, what good came from this? What do we look at and say, okay, this is implementable long-term. Maybe we can really reconsider some remote work things. Maybe there's meetings we just don't need to have, and maybe some of them can be used on Microsoft Teams or Zoom. Then there's other things we go, okay, now that we tried that, okay, part of that didn't work, but let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. I think that's what companies should start thinking.
That's really smart. And we're all renegotiating not only our physical space, but our personal space and workspace. I'm with you. I have 2 college students that are home as well. And God bless them. They take our 2 dogs into their rooms and entertain them while I'm doing this, so they're quiet. What are the things that, looking forward, now, you did a nice job of describing what are we doing right now. What do we need to be thinking about for that 12 months, 18 months out? How do we even begin to plan for that?
Yeah, I think the first thing I would do is I'd start risk management. Okay, so we're going to kind of ramp back up in the future, 12 to 18 months from now. What risks do we need to shore up now? Okay, what do we need to start planning for? Because, it's funny, I had a client say, okay, because I do a lot of work with unconscious bias and, connecting people, but I've always done change because I knew you needed to be able to implement this thing. You've got to be able to change a culture, and you have to have change management for it. And so they were like, we had you scheduled for unconscious bias, but this navigating change thing seems really timely right now. I was like, yeah, it really does. So we did a round, we're doing another round, and they said, here's the deal. When we come back, navigating change is going to be really timely again, because now we're going to be coming into what is really a new normal. If people are trying to call this a little prematurely a new normal, we're not in anything normal. So, right now thinking, hey, what are the risks? Based on how I treat people right now, who might I lose? Because, there are people who are not happy, but they're not happy, but they're staying because there's no other opportunity. When things open up, there's going to be opportunities. Which clients do I need to make sure I absolutely love up on and take care of? Because when this thing opens up, there's going to be more opportunities for them to go elsewhere. So starting off with dealing with the risk is a big deal. Then from there, I look at, okay, almost like a blue ocean strategy type thing. Hey, what new opportunities arose during this 12 to 8 months? Because it's going to happen, right? It's going to happen. The 3 of us are speakers, and I'll be honest with you, I avoided doing virtual webinars and trainings like the plague. I was like, we're not going to have the same effect. We're not going to have the same interaction. Now I'm like, I got cameras, I got a ring light right here, special microphone, I'm working on, so how do I make a 3-dimensional, because obviously that's the new opportunity.
Right.
And truthfully, if I'd been more self-aware, I could have taken advantage of that opportunity early, right? Some companies are going to realize that, like, hey, you know what? There's new ground I can break that's starting to open up. But what I have to do first is listen to the different employees, because sometimes their complaints are going to give you opportunities, and sometimes their ideas that sound so far-fetched are really going to be gold, but you still have to weed out the garbage, right? So risk first, really hit that risk first, and then start doing opportunity. And then once you do that, then you start establishing your new normalcy. So rewarding people for having your new, your SOPs and your procedures and your policies, and making sure now that you can kind of put this new wet cement, let it dry and be nice and level in you.
You mentioned unconscious bias. Are there things that we need to be paying attention to right now in that sense?
Corporately or socially?
Both.
Both.
I'm glad you said that this is like a bar conversation, because we may start drinking in a moment. Corporately, yes. We're going to be far more aware of how people communicate, especially if we're not using Zoom and things like that. Accents are going to make have a much bigger impact than they used to have. People's backgrounds. So now you're actually looking into people's homes and how they live. And what we're going to do is we're going to start connecting the dots. And we have like a snapshot of a person, but now we're going to extrapolate it into a movie. And so I think that's where it becomes dangerous. People who have a lower income clearly are going to be at a disadvantage. They're not going to have the same Wi-Fi or internet. They may not have the same technology. There's all of those things. And, they may be in a situation that's just more chaotic. So I think corporately, you're going to have to deal with that. You have to deal with a lot of the gender issues. All of that is still going to exist corporately. Socially, it's a nightmare. Socially, it's an absolute.
Oh, no.
I mean, it is. It's because what this has revealed so much. So I do a lot of work with unconscious bias in healthcare. And there are statistics that the average person would be floored by. And here's an example. I had a client call me and say, Tony, we want you to come in and do some unconscious bias training. Our state has a standard. I think the standard was we're supposed to have 22% of our maternity patients end up with a C-section, and we have 29%. So we want you to come in and do unconscious bias training. I was like, okay, there's a disconnect here. Why would you want unconscious bias training to fix the number of C-sections? And so we started having a conversation. I started doing the research. And it turns out it's a known thing in the medical field that minority women, primarily Black and Hispanic, are more likely to have a C-section when it's not necessary, because the doctor feels that they have a higher tolerance for pain. And so they can go ahead, give them the C-section, and move on to do other things. Okay. That's horrific. But what that does is now you start to see the disparity in healthcare. So you see minority patients have a higher likelihood of diabetes, of high blood pressure, of not wanting to go to the doctor because they experience all of these biases. So all these I just lost the word, but all these conditions now put them at higher risk. So you see a higher percentage of people now who are dying from it or getting extremely sick. Plus, poor people are less likely to be able to telework. They're still going into work. They're more likely to live in a congested area, so not able to socially distance. And so you see now this whole situation breaking down into race, socioeconomic, and then you're going to start getting nationality and ethnicity. And so that's where I say, yeah, it's from a social standpoint and from our society is going to really have to come back and reckon with this, that we've caused an imbalance in the effect of how this is playing out simply because we've allowed systemic bias to last for so long. And that's just looking at it from a health standpoint.
Well, and we've seen that in my city. So in the inner city of Milwaukee, there's a much higher rate of infection for all of the reasons you just described. And I think there's some disparity in how people are reacting to our safer at home, orders. And it does depend on your experience. If you're in the nice suburb home with, great Wi-Fi, it's like, all right, whatever, I can do it. It's fine. But if you can't go to your job and you don't have income and it's very difficult to physically distance yourself from other people, that's a much different experience.
Yeah, it really is. And I think we're not considering that. That's not what you hear in the media, right? You just see a statistic. And so people are saying, well, somehow this disease is just attacking them. I mean, I could even get into the origins of this, and I think there's some issues with that, but that's probably for a real sit down with beer and barbecue like Thom, which was a great time, by the way.
So as a society, sticking on this social aspect that you brought up, as a society, we're going through a major disruption. Mm-hmm. How can we learn from this and come out of it better in regards to just the healthcare example you used when it comes to minorities? How can we learn from this?
Well, my first thought is we won't learn from it if we don't have conversations, right? If we stay, it's interesting, if you look at migration patterns in the United States, we are at one of the most segregated points in our history. People think that we're more integrated. We're really not. People are migrating and they're segregating and they're separating based on race and social economics, and it really is in that order. So having conversations and interactions and finding, being able to, on social media, interact with people who you normally wouldn't, get a different perspective, that's a first step. Mm-hmm. I do think there's going to have to be a growth of empathy, because we've become a society that values the rights of the individual more than the rights of the collective. And we're seeing that play out. And I think that that's going to be really challenging if we're going to want to learn from and grow from this. And that's on all sides. That we'll have to learn, hey, there's multiple sides of the story. And just because I see it this way doesn't mean that it's the best way. I think what will be fascinating, whether it's from bias or in terms of just everything else, I think people are going to, so I'll give you an example. So I've got both my boys home, right? Which is crazy. And I, of course, thought this was going to be a complete disaster. One of the things that has happened in the past is ever since my oldest went to college, my kids have about a 4-day tolerance with each other. That's it. It's a wrap, right? They're both like adults, and they push each other's buttons to the point that we went to Disney and we were at Epcot, and my younger son said, I have to leave now or we're going to fight. And they didn't talk to each other for 3 months. I mean, it was, I've never seen this happen with them. My youngest son, so both boys have been here about 4.5 weeks. They've been best of friends. They've never had one issue because they're looking at this from a different perspective. They're giving each other far more grace and patience and, hey, I see you need distance. Let me go do this to give you space. And I think from my end as a parent, in a weird way, I'm almost not looking forward to when the social distancing ends, because they're going to leave. And I'm thinking, we're building memories here that we probably would not have any other way. And so I'm hoping for the average person, they're going to reprioritize their life. People are chasing money versus chasing what's really of value to them. People are, I think what's happening right now is people are looking at others saying, wow, you need groceries, I'll get them to you. I've seen so much on social media. Hey, I'm starting a GoFundMe page for anybody who just needs money because they lost their job. I know one person I just saw on Twitter yesterday had a $20,000 GoFundMe that they'd raised, and they're just giving away the money, no questions asked. If you have a need, this is what we would hope our society would be, right?
Right.
But it's taken a pandemic to make it really to reveal it. And so back to your question, Thom, my hope is we would look from this and we would really go back and reevaluate our values and say, okay, what's going to make us a better society? How can I be, not just a good employee and a person who makes a lot of money, but how can I contribute to my community better? How can I contribute to my family better? How can I, make a difference that's not just a financial legacy, but really I'm contributing to the good of others, and I may never get anything in return or even get recognition for it because that's not my motive for it. I think that's really what I would hope our society would learn from it that would make it better.
Well, and Thom, in my work with companies, the ones that I would call purpose-driven companies have that same sort of vision in their corporate culture, that they're looking out for the greater good, and it actually is lived as opposed to just written on a wall somewhere. Do you see a move towards that, or do you hope for a move towards that?
So I think Thom and I have a mutual friend who posted this on social media yesterday, but Someone posted a social media post on basically every corporate commercial right now looks the exact same, right? And it's, sad music. We're focusing on people, it's
nurses and firemen.
Exactly. And you're like, oh man, just last week you're giving your investors like $1 billion. So I think it's an awakening. The question is, what will happen is when this is done, you'll be able to distinguish between who this became part of their real ethos and who saw this as, this is our marketing opportunity to survive. I think what's also fascinating is many of the things that you just mentioned are the very things that Generation Z and younger Generation Y desire in a workplace.
Mm-hmm.
Companies that are more purpose-driven, more value-driven, will do a much better job of recruiting and retaining younger talent because they really fit in to the worldview of that younger generation.
And it's really interesting because Eliz and I both went to ask a question on that last one, and they were very, very similar. Because where I was going to go, shocking, I know. Where I was going to go with this was, as we wrap this up, sort of back to business. The three of us work with really cool companies, right? Mm-hmm. We've each given an example now, and probably could give hundreds of the companies we work with are trying to handle disruption through these positive steps. But that's not all the companies that are out there. So, as you were talking, through this whole thing, what about the companies that the three of us aren't talking to, who aren't necessarily looking to 12 months ahead, but are still experiencing this disruption? What message do you have for the companies out there who maybe are missing the boat a little bit?
First thing, take care of your people. We always say the people are our number one asset. Now they really, really are. So right now, do whatever it takes to take care of your people. Make sure that they're connected. Make sure that they're valued. Make sure that they have access to video platforms right now so they can, really rebuild and strengthen their sense of community because they've lost that in their workplace. Take care of your people first. If you miss out on that, you're going to lose out on everything. And here's the thing, you're going to need an outside voice. That's where we come in because we all have kids. I know Thom has kids, and now I know Eliz has kids. We all have kids. There are times, I've had one of my friends give my son advice. He goes, oh my gosh, that was brilliant. And I'm thinking, I know I've said that at least 47 times. The exact same thing, but because you heard it from someone who lives outside of this house, it's like, oh my gosh, right? Sometimes, even if we're saying the same thing, which we're not, hearing it from the voice of an outside expert makes a world of difference. So spend the money. And I really, here's the thing. I just responded to an email from a client and said, hey, would you, come in and do a virtual workshop for us? And, we would pay you in exposure. And I was like, you're an oil company. No, I will not do that because here's what that means. You don't value me, but you also don't value your people. You don't spend the money and invest in your people. It's a huge, huge statement.
And that's what I hope that oil companies will let me buy gasoline on exposure. I'll just put the little sticker on the back of my car and drive around, and everybody will know where I got my gas. It doesn't work that way. It doesn't work that way, does it?
Well, if you've seen the price of oil, it may be for exposure right now. It's pretty close. Might be. Yeah, but no, that's the whole thing, right? People say, well, you do this for exposure. People die from exposure. I'm good. No, thank you. That's right.
Well, Tony, thank you so much for joining us here on the webinar talk show. If anybody is watching this and they're like, I got to know more about Tony Chatman, how do they find you? TonyChatman.com, ChatMan, CHAT is in Tom, MAN. Tony Chatman on Twitter. Instagram is Tony Chatman Speaks because somebody took Tony Chatman. But everything else, LinkedIn, Facebook, carrier pigeon, whatever you need to do. If it's Tony Chatman, you'll find me, okay?
Fantastic. And if there is someone out there that would like to make their virtual presentation not boring and more interactive, because Thom and I certainly believe that engaged conversation and interviews like this are far better than talking heads.
Absolutely. So look us up at webinartalkshow.com. You can find all the information there. You can find Eliz at Eliz Green. That's Green with an E on the end.
So many E's.
So many E's in your name. And then I'm at thomsinger.com.
And we'll see you tomorrow for the webinar talk show. Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Tony.
Thanks for having me, guys.